obsession, betrayal, and a chilling crime that shocked the nation. Carolyn Warmus, once a glamorous schoolteacher, became infamous for a murder that echoed the plot of a Hollywood thriller. Join us as we unravel the twisted tale of love, jealousy, and a deadly fixation that led to one of the most sensational trials in American history. This is a story you won't forget.
Carolyn Warmus was born on January 8, 1964, in Troy, Michigan, into a family of privilege and affluence. Her father, Thomas Warmus, was a wealthy insurance executive who provided Carolyn with a comfortable lifestyle. Growing up in the suburbs of Detroit, Carolyn was exposed to the luxuries that came with her family's wealth, including exclusive private schools and extravagant vacations. Despite this, her childhood was far from ideal, as her parents divorced when she was young, creating a void in her life that would later manifest in troubling ways. Carolyn attended Seaholm High School in Birmingham, Michigan, where she was known for her striking looks and outgoing personality. She was popular among her peers, but there were hints of insecurity beneath her confident exterior. After high school, Carolyn pursued higher education at the University of Michigan, where she studied psychology. Her interest in understanding the human mind and behavior was evident early on, though it would later take a dark turn. Following her graduation, Carolyn moved to New York City in the mid-1980s, seeking a fresh start and a career in teaching. She enrolled at Teachers College, Columbia University, to further her studies and eventually secured a job as an elementary school teacher in Westchester County. It was here that Carolyn's life would take a dramatic and ultimately tragic turn. While teaching, Carolyn met Paul Solomon, a fellow teacher who was 17 years her senior. Despite the significant age difference, the two began an affair, with Carolyn becoming increasingly infatuated with Paul. Her obsession with him grew over time, and she became deeply entangled in his personal life, even though Paul was married to Betty Jean Solomon. Carolyn's relationship with Paul was intense and all-consuming. She showered him with gifts, tried to insert herself into every aspect of his life, and became increasingly possessive. Her obsession with Paul began to overshadow everything else in her life, including her teaching career. She was no longer the bright, promising teacher she once was, but rather a woman consumed by a dangerous fixation. As her obsession deepened, Carolyn's behavior became more erratic. She began following Paul and his wife, Betty Jean, keeping tabs on their every move. The idea of sharing Paul with another woman became unbearable for Carolyn, and her thoughts grew darker and more desperate. The woman who had once been seen as a bright, young teacher was now spiraling into a dangerous path that would lead to a shocking crime. Carolyn's life, which had once seemed so full of promise, was now defined by her fixation on Paul Solomon. The privileged upbringing, the education, the career, all of it seemed meaningless in the face of her obsession. As the tension in her life built, so too did her resolve to remove the one obstacle she saw standing in the way of her happiness, Betty Jean Solomon. The stage was set for a crime that would captivate the nation, as Carolyn Warmus became increasingly consumed by her obsession, leading her down a path from which there would be no return. On January 15, 1989, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Greenburgh, New York, was rocked by a gruesome discovery. Betty Jean Solomon, the wife of Paul Solomon, was found brutally murdered in her home. She had been shot 9 times in the back and arms, a clear sign of a crime fueled by rage and hatred. The murder shocked the community, and the investigation that followed would uncover a web of deceit, obsession, and betrayal. The investigation quickly focused on Paul Solomon, the victim's husband, who admitted to having an affair with Carolyn Warmus. However, it wasn't long before the spotlight shifted to Carolyn herself, as her obsessive behavior and possible motives came to light. Carolyn's fixation on Paul had reached a dangerous peak, and investigators began to suspect that she was the one behind Betty Jean's murder. One of the most damning pieces of evidence against Carolyn was a set of gloves found at the crime scene. Investigators believed that the gloves belonged to Carolyn, as they were similar to those she had purchased just days before the murder. Additionally, phone records showed that Carolyn had made several calls to Paul Solomon's home on the night of the murder, further placing her at the center of the investigation. Carolyn's alibi also began to unravel under scrutiny. She claimed to have been in Manhattan at the time of the murder, but her story was inconsistent, and witnesses reported seeing her in the vicinity of the Solomon home on the night of the crime. As the evidence against her mounted, Carolyn's cool demeanor began to crack, revealing the true extent of her obsession with Paul and her desperation to eliminate Betty Jean from his life. Investigators also uncovered a chilling aspect of Carolyn's personality, her fascination with the 1987 film Fatal Attraction, in which a woman becomes obsessed with a married man and ultimately tries to kill his wife. The parallels between the film and Carolyn's life were too striking to ignore, and it became clear that she had modeled her actions after the film's protagonist, further fueling the theory that she was the killer. As the investigation progressed, more details about Carolyn's dark side came to light. She had allegedly stalked Paul and Betty Jean for months, showing up at their home unannounced and leaving threatening messages. Her obsession had reached a point where she believed that only Betty Jean's death could bring her the happiness she so desperately craved. Despite the mounting evidence, Carolyn maintained her innocence, insisting that she had nothing to do with Betty Jean's murder. However, her increasingly erratic behavior, combined with the overwhelming circumstantial evidence, made it difficult for investigators to believe her claims. The case against Carolyn Warmus was growing stronger by the day, and it was only a matter of time before she would be brought to trial for the murder of Betty Jean Solomon. Carolyn Warmus was arrested on February 2, 1990, and charged with the murder of Betty Jean Solomon. The case quickly became a media sensation, with the press dubbing it the Fatal Attraction murder due to the eerie similarities between Carolyn's actions and the plot of the 1987 film. The trial, which began in 1991, was closely followed by the public, who were captivated by the story of obsession, betrayal, and murder. The prosecution's case against Carolyn was built on a combination of circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. The gloves found at the crime scene, the phone records, and the inconsistencies in Carolyn's alibi all played a crucial role in the trial. The prosecution also highlighted Carolyn's obsession with Paul Solomon, arguing that her desire to eliminate Betty Jean as a rival was the motive behind the murder. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence presented at trial was the testimony of a gun dealer who claimed that Carolyn had purchased a .25 caliber pistol, the same type of weapon used in the murder, just weeks before Betty Jean's death. The prosecution argued that Carolyn had carefully planned the murder, purchasing the gun and gloves in advance and making sure to cover her tracks. Throughout the trial, Carolyn maintained her innocence, often displaying a calm and composed demeanor. She claimed that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and that she had been unfairly targeted due to her relationship with Paul Solomon. However, the jury was unconvinced, and after weeks of testimony and deliberation, they found Carolyn Warmus guilty of second-degree murder on January 29, 1992. Carolyn was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, a sentence that reflected the severity of her crime. The conviction was a victory for the prosecution, but it did little to quell the public's fascination with the case. The Fatal Attraction murder remained in the headlines for years, as people continued to speculate about the true nature of Carolyn's relationship with Paul Solomon and the events that led to Betty Jean's death. Carolyn's legal battles did not end with her conviction. She appealed her sentence multiple times, arguing that she had been wrongly convicted and that no evidence would prove her innocence. However, each appeal was denied, and Carolyn remained behind bars, serving out her sentence in a New York State prison. The trials and convictions of Carolyn Warmus were a defining moment in the American legal system, highlighting the dangers of obsession and the lengths to which some people will go to achieve their desires. The case also raised important questions about the role of the media in shaping public perception and the impact of sensationalized trials on the justice system. The aftermath of the Carolyn Warmus case left an indelible mark on the American legal system, the media, and society as a whole. Her conviction and subsequent imprisonment for the murder of Betty Jean Solomon sparked widespread public interest, largely due to the sensational nature of the crime and its eerie similarities to the plot of the 1987 film Fatal Attraction. The case continued to be a subject of fascination for years, and Carolyn Warmus became a symbol of obsessive love gone horribly wrong. After her conviction, Carolyn Warmus spent nearly 27 years in prison, during which she maintained her innocence and repeatedly sought to overturn her conviction. Her case became a rallying point for those who questioned the fairness of her trial and the influence of media coverage on the jury's decision. Despite multiple appeals and attempts to have her conviction overturned, each effort was unsuccessful, and Warmus remained incarcerated until her parole in June 2019. Carolyn's time in prison was marked by a deepening sense of isolation and a relentless pursuit of justice in her own mind. She wrote extensively, reflecting on her experiences and the events that led to her incarceration. These writings, along with interviews and public statements, helped to keep her case in the public eye, even as the years passed. Her case became a topic of discussion in legal circles, particularly in relation to the challenges of ensuring a fair trial in cases that receive widespread media attention. Upon her release, Carolyn Warmus was met with a mix of reactions. Some viewed her as a tragic figure who had been wronged by a system swayed by sensationalism, while others continued to believe in her guilt, seeing her release as a potential threat. Warmus herself continued to assert her innocence, advocating for the re-examination of evidence using modern forensic techniques that were not available during her original trial. The legacy of the Carolyn Warmus case extends beyond the courtroom. It served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of obsessive love and the potential for violence when personal boundaries are crossed. The case also highlighted the role of media in shaping public perception, raising important questions about the influence of press coverage on legal proceedings. The Fatal Attraction label attached to the case by the media not only sensationalized the trial but also influenced the way the public and jury viewed Carolyn Warmus, possibly impacting the outcome of her trial. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and television programs, each examining different aspects of the crime, the trial, and the psychological factors that may have contributed to the events. The case also left a lasting impact on the legal system. It highlighted the challenges of ensuring a fair trial in high-profile cases, leading to discussions about the need for reform in areas such as jury selection and media access to courtroom proceedings. The Warmus case served as a reminder of the importance of maintaining the integrity of the legal process, even in the face of intense public interest and media scrutiny. In the years following her release, Carolyn Warmus has largely stayed out of the public eye, though she has expressed a desire to continue advocating for her innocence. Her case remains a significant chapter in the history of American true crime, serving as both a cautionary tale and a point of reflection on the complexities of justice, media influence, and the human psyche. In the broader context of American culture, the Carolyn Warmus case has been referenced in discussions about the portrayal of women in the media, particularly in relation to the stereotype of the fatal woman who is driven by irrational passions.